Good morning, Warzone kids. This is part 3 of my side quest into the Union Briar Patch. I'm going to spend a minimal amount of recapping, otherwise they'll take the whole video. Parts 1 and 2 are on here below, and I got them in a playlist on my YouTube channel at Trail to the Western Lands. Like, subscribe, and follow. Leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you. But this is part 3 of my side quest off the main trail into sharing with you some of my experience in the briar patch of my work in life, which is for about the last 20 years or so been in and around both sides of organized labor organizing campaigns in the United States. I specify that because it's not community organizing, it's not political organizing, it's labor organizing in the United States. I was an elected guy on the union side for about 10 years. I never got hired for a union staff job. I was a guy with a job. I raised my hand. I was president of a state treasurer and then president of a statewide union. I did those two things for 9 years. I was a shop steward for a year or so before that, a couple years before that. And did 3 years as president of a state chapter of the AFL-CIO. Those are kind of my bona fides for having opinions on this stuff. I was really far behind the curtain, as you might say. You know, my experience in that world is very different than someone who, than the average experience, someone that has a job and where there's a union, or even as a union activist, a shop steward or on bargaining team, something like that. As president of the union, you get involved in the sausage making. And I've worked for about 10 years. This is my 10th year working as a labor consultant, basically like a hired gun on the management side. I give them advice. I talk to employees. I explain how the law and regulations work. And I live in these campaigns. They're a rough and tumble, I would say, full contact world. And it's like a briar patch. It's thorny. It's scratchy. And I've certainly been scratched up my share. But it's my briar patch. And like Brer Rabbit and the Uncle Remus stories, it's where I live. I'm comfortable in it. And so I want to share with you some of my experience in that briar patch, and maybe you can relate to it. Maybe you can find that it sheds some light on some experiences you might have, because it's a strange world. There's a strong, I think there's a strong kinship between the atmosphere in a organized labor campaign and the society we live in at present, if you're in the United States. Present being 2026. Almost got it wrong by a decade. The image I have in my mind to start out with is the image of Roman diplomats in the Punic Wars. I studied classics in college. I'm interested in ancient Greece and, to a far lesser extent, ancient Rome. But the Romans were a belligerent people. They kind of liked to fight. And the truism about ancient Rome is that they were never happier than they were when their back was up against the wall and they were backed into a corner. And they were having a lot of tussles with these people called the Phoenicians, the Punic peoples. And there are stories about the way that they did diplomacy. And this is kind of this stereotypical version of the story. The Roman diplomat goes to the Phoenician king or consul, whatever they had. And the Roman diplomat reaches inside his toga and he pulls out a loaf of bread and he pulls out his short sword, which I think they called the gladius, a little short 2-foot long sword. And he holds them each in his hands. And he says, look, we've been talking long enough. Let's cut to the chase. I bring peace, and he holds out the loaf of bread. And I bring war. And he holds out the sword. Now you just tell me which one you want, and I don't much care which. And he throws them both down on the ground. And he says, think about it, but whatever you do, make up your mind before you leave this circle. And the Roman diplomat reaches down in the dirt and draws a circle with the toe of his sandal. There you have it, peace and war. And that Roman soldier, that Roman diplomat, brought peace and he brought war. He had him with him, had him in his pocket, had him in the folds of his toga. And I see a strong kinship between that and how you and I go through life. And what's our stance to those around us and the world around us? Is it a stance of peace, ready to break bread? Or is it a stance of war, ready to shed blood? We bring that in our toga. I bring that in my toga every time I talk to someone. Am I bringing peace or am I bringing war? Now that Roman diplomat more or less wanted war, as you can tell. That's on him. We have peace and we have war. Which one do you really want to reach for? That's what's on my mind as a backdrop to the Union Briar Patch. Because the dynamics, and again, let me reiterate, and I think this is clear if you watch the first two parts. There's no partisan part to this. I'm a campaigner in that world. I get a paycheck on the management side. I spent 10 years of my life on the union side, neck deep in it. I didn't wake up one day and decide I was all wrong. I just had enough. But I had a lot of experience and expertise in how this world works. It was a briar patch. And I tried doing other things, but I kept coming back to it. I like these campaigns. They're my briar patch. So I get a paycheck on the management side to work these campaigns. What's my stance toward my fellow human creatures? For a long time, it was definitely a stance of war. All the way around, globally, on the union side. And for a while on the management side, definitely a stance of war, conflict. Let's fight. So I'm interested in this world, and what I want to share, the part of my experience I want to share with you is that feeling that it is actually a choice, no matter what your world is. There's a kinship. The dynamics are, I would say, not the same, but a very strong echo can be heard in the world of organized labor campaigns that I live in and the broader society as a whole. A very loud, clear echo can be heard. And I believe there's something fractal about the human experience. The small thing is like the large thing. If you take a picture of the coastline of Maine from 10 feet in the air, it would be rocky and squiggly. If you got in a hot air balloon and took a picture of the coastline of Maine from 1,000 feet in the air, it would be rocky and squiggly. If you're in an airplane at 30,000 feet and you looked at the Maine coastline, it would be rocky and squiggly. And if you're in the International Space Station and you look down over the coast of Maine and you can see the whole thing, it would be rocky and squiggly. I think that it's the same with regard to war and peace. When I interact with one of my fellow human creatures, such as you, right now, I can bring war or I can bring peace. And I'm telling you, I bring peace to you. I bring peace to myself. If you're in a room full of people, you can bring a stance of war or a stance of peace toward them. If you're at a whole place of employment, you can have a stance of war or a stance of peace. If you're in a county, you can have a stance of war or a stance of peace. I live in Vermont. If you go to town meeting day, if you live in the town that has that, I do not. I live in the city. We have a city form of governance. We have a thing which I think is called an Australian secret ballot. It's the kind of ballot that we all have. You go there, you get a ballot, you connect, you fill in a little arrow, you put your ballot in the machine, it counts it. In towns in Vermont, most of them have a town meeting coming up here in March. And it's direct democracy. You go there and you hash it out. And then you vote on things. And part of the agreement of being a citizen is that when you get done hashing it out, you accept the fact that whatever side won, and whatever side lost, but you're all still citizens of the town. You all still have to live there, and you would like to go on with the stance of peace. Now, that stance of peace toward your fellow citizens depends on the idea that you are fellow citizens. That's an idea directly taken from ancient Greece, and believe me, I am well aware of the massive amount of shortcomings in the Greek, in the concept of citizens that they had. In the city of Athens, one that, I was the most familiar with, maybe 10% of the people that lived there were full citizens. Women were not citizens, full citizens. Children are not citizens. Resident aliens, metics, they were not citizens. Slaves are not citizens. 90% of the people that lived there were not citizens. However, that is true. It's not on me. I'm not responsible for that. The way I broadly was taught Western civilization is that it's a series, it's a chronicle of the advancing notion of citizenship, you could put it like that, or the advancing notion of nobility. Nobility, I don't mean lords in the English House of Lords, or a noble like you're a duke or an earl, or you're different than other people. I mean the nobility of being a fully fledged human being. The nobility of being a citizen in Athens. And they limited that nobility to 10%. You got to be a landowning person with enough means to have a shield and a sword, a shield and a spear. In that world, they kind of viewed it as, if you want to show up and vote, then you got to be willing to abide by it, and you got to be willing to go fight for it in the field with your spear and your sword. And that is kind of how they viewed it. 10%. Well, I, in the present world, live in a world where I think we all possess that nobility. Doesn't mean we're all citizens of the same political entity. Maybe you're Welsh or Scottish, or maybe you're an Uzbek. I don't know. But I regard each one of us as possessing that kind of nobility. That's what I mean by that. And so the difference between, in a situation like town meeting day, it's you have a stance of peace because you're all citizens, and you know that you're all going to have to live there after town meeting day with whatever the results are. You just have to deal with it and accept the fact that the other citizens in that town hall meeting, or in that town meeting, are people just like you. They put their socks and their shoes on. They got dressed. They brushed their teeth. They took a leak, and they went to town meeting, just like you did. And they see things differently. How many snowplows should the town have? The school budget. Should we have a full-time policeman? All that kind of stuff. They hash it all out. Because they are the ones that have to pay taxes to support it all. Right? But you have to have a stance of peace in order for that to work, and that's a challenge for many people. Challenge for all of us. So there's a strong kinship between that and the world of organized labor campaigns, because that also is about an election. And there's a lot in those dynamics that there's a strong kinship between those dynamics and the dynamics of war. People are very good at going to war with each other. People are very good at splitting into two different tribes and deciding that our tribe is the good tribe, the real tribe, at least it's our tribe, and the other tribe is the different tribe. They're the different ones. And this town ain't big enough for both of us. That's a stance of war. Not, we're all citizens, and that's a stance of peace. We're all citizens, and we're going to hash this out, and we see it differently. And at the end of the day, we're all going to go back to living here because we all actually do live here. That's a different stance than a person with a stance of war in the whole thing, where our side is right and the other side is wrong, and our side is our tribe and the other side is the other tribe, and we are not interested in living at peace with the people in the other tribe. So I'm not going to see it as a conflict over snowplows and policemen and school budgets and roads and salt and sand and zoning. I'm going to see it as our tribe and their tribe. And that's a dynamic of war. And we're very, very good at it. A friend of mine who studied anthropology told me, and I do not know if this is true, but I like the point, so I'm going to make it anyway. He said, among chimpanzees, our close relation in the animal world, probably our closest, amongst chimpanzees, they like to go to war. They live in tribes as well. And here's how you know a tribe of chimpanzees is going to go to war. They get past a certain threshold of young fighting age male chimpanzees. Whatever that threshold is for them, when they go beyond that threshold, they go to war. I don't know if that's true or not, but I like the idea. And people do this as well. People just go to war sometimes. It seems to be a feature of human nature. Like it or don't like it. It seems to be a permanent feature of human nature. Permanent in the sense that as long as we're Homo sapiens, it seems to have been there. And I would venture to guess as far back in time as you went to our earliest human creature forebears, 250,000 years ago, I expect you'd find some tribes that went to war from time to time. That's how it is in the world of organized labor campaigns. More like a war often, not always. It can go more like a war between tribes than it is like town meeting day where people are trying to make up their mind how to vote. And with an awareness that they all live in that town and they're all going to go back to living there. See how I mean? That's how you have a stance of peace toward your fellow creatures in a circumstance like that, is you have in your mind that we all live here. We're all living here in this town, at this place of employment, on this planet. And we see things differently here. What's our stance toward that going to be? What's our stance toward each other? Is it going to be one of equal citizens? Equal human creatures living in the world who see things differently? And then we're going to decide how we want to resolve the things. We're going to decide what do we want to do with that fact that we see things differently and we have something we got to make up our minds about. What's my stance toward my fellow human creatures in that kind of circumstance? Do we see things differently? And we all have to live here, so we're going to accept and honor the fact that I look at these circumstances and I think we have enough snowplows. And you look at the circumstances and you think, no, we need more snowplows and I'm willing to pay more taxes to get them. Well, we're going to hash it out and vote and vote and vote and vote and vote until some resolutions and a budget passes. Then some of us are going to be happier than others, but we're going to go home and we're all going to live in that same town. You're better off with a stance of peace. If you want a stance of peace toward the world, that's how you look at it. If you reach in your toga and you grab that short sword, you grab the gladius, you say, no. No. There are two tribes here. There's the Hooks and the Snooks. I think that's what Doctor Who called them. And that's really what this is all about. The hooks are the good-thinking people that know. And because they're good, they know how many snowplows we need, and they know we need another one. And those snooks over there on the other side of the room, those snooks are bad. And they are different than us. And you can tell that because those snooks think we have enough snowplows right now. Those snooks are bad. And this ain't really nothing about snowplows. That's just what it says on the ballot. This is really about telling the hooks from the snooks. That's what this is all about. And when we cast that ballot, it's all going to be clear. The snooks are voting one way, and the hooks are voting another way, and never the twain shall meet. And after this town meeting's over, we're going to go on about our lives, and we're going to know who amongst us are the good ones, the hooks, the right-thinking people, and which ones of us are the snooks, the wrong'uns, the bad ones, the others. When that's your stance toward the world, you look down. It ain't a loaf of bread in your hand, Pilgrim, it's a gladius. That dynamic happens at town meetings, happens in Dr. Seuss stories with hooks and snooks, happens among people all the time, happens in countries all the time. And I'm going to bring this to a close. This is part 3 of the side quest through the Union Briar Patch. And I'll be back in a minute with part 4. It's a beautiful day on the trail of the Western Lands, Pilgrim. We can get in a lot of miles today. Let's walk them together.